Introduction to Church Planting. Today we're looking at Evangelism Resources, some books that might help you have some examples or illustrations of how to share the gospel. These are helpful for us to look at other conversations and other ways to get into those. These resources will also give you some principles of why we do what we do and what's important in a gospel conversation. And then there are some tips of how to talk to certain different people, different religious groups, and how to bring them to a point of response. Let's get started. Back to an introduction to church planting. Today we're talking about evangelism resources, and I want to give you just a few books that I think could be helpful to you on learning how to share the gospel more effectively. The first book I want to share is one we've kind of already pulled some things out of. It's called Any Three, which means anyone, anywhere, anytime, being able to share the gospel in almost any context by Mike Shipman. Now, in this book, you'll see a framework for sharing, which we've talked about in our His Story segment on sharing the gospel. You'll also see some helps for sharing with Muslims, as that is the main focus of where this book originated from. But also, what you'll find in this book are what Mike calls bee stings that poison evangelistic effectiveness. In fact, you will be surprised at some of these that are almost seem to be agreed upon things about evangelism that actually are that poison our efforts to share the gospel. And these are very important for us to address to get more people out sharing the gospel. Another book I'd recommend to you is called Turning Everyday Conversations into Gospel Conversations. And this is just another popular method out there in sharing. Many people know this as the three circles. This is a very practical illustration of moving from what God intended in creation, where we are because of the fall, and how to get back. Now, I would say that there are some nuances in there theologically that I would want to be careful that we are talking about not just the sins that we do, but the sinner that we are. It's the difference between the condition of sin and the character and conduct of sins. And so when we're sharing the gospel, we may start with the fruit of our condition, but it's important for us to get to the root of our condition. And you can do that with this method, but I think some of the verbiage has to be intentional with that. What I like about this as well is that it's a reproducible method. It's being used in all sorts of contexts where you can put any language on top of it, talking about any people group's language with this. Kids can learn to use this. In fact, any illustration that can hold the points, make it easier for us to remember what we're supposed to do in sharing the gospel. And it's out in abundance, and even in multiple languages. And you can there's even a Three Circles app that review it, and you can walk someone through that. Another book I would encourage you to read is called The Way of the Master by Ray Comfort and Kirk Cameron. In there, you're going to find a lot of encouragement to share the gospel. You're going to see a lot of effective ways of how to get to the issue of sin and lostness in a conversation. In fact, at the core of this is how do you use the law, the Ten Commandments, to get to lostness so we see our need and Christ's provision. And one of the things you can do is you can go online to YouTube, and there's great examples of how this has been implemented on the Way of the Master. And Ray Comfort, Kirk Cameron love going to places that are highly trafficked, and they do different, in a sense, gimmicks or ways, conversation starters to get into conversation. Then they follow the same pattern in John 4 of get into conversation, get to God, get to lostness, to get to the gospel, and then get to a response. And if you're looking at a sample of how can I do this, this is another great resource. Then there is Mark Cahill's book, One Thing You Can't Do in Heaven. And the one thing you can't do in heaven is share the gospel, because everyone in heaven is already saved. In here, what you're going to find are many encouraging examples and practical advice. Mark went to Auburn on a basketball scholarship. And one of the things he'll tell you in his book is that as a kid, he spent a lot of time shooting the basketball. And he said this, and this is kind of the premise of his book, is that if you shoot a basketball a lot, you get good at it the more you do it. And he said the reason why I went to Auburn is because I'd put my time in and gotten really good at this. And he said that kind of thinking I bring into my gospel sharing. He said when I sit on the plane or I meet people, I'm intentional to talk to them in order to try to share the gospel, because I know the more I do it, the better I get at it. And the more ways I see how to shape the conversation to be effective. And so here you're going to see some great dialogue examples and some really practical advice on how to share the gospel. And then another resource is by Jeff Bronner on how to share Christ with your friends of another faith. This book gives you very concise introductions to certain world religions and gives you multiple approaches to share the gospel. And what I love about this book is this is from field practitioners. So what Dr. Bronner did is he was connected to many people around the world, and he asked some practitioners to give them what is your best way of sharing the gospel with this religious group. And so what he does in each chapter, he basically says, here's the world religion, here are their major tenets and major things to think about in sharing the gospel. And then he lets these other authors or practitioners give their way of sharing, getting to a conversation and sharing the gospel. And in each religious affinity, he will have about at least three practitioners share. So you're going to get three different ways of sharing the same gospel in that worldview context. So it's a great way to look at it from different approaches, especially if you're sharing with a friend of another faith. Well, these are some of my favorite evangelism resources. What about you? What video or what book has helped you be more effective in understanding how to get into conversation and how to get to the gospel? Well, until next time, that does it for today. Hope you have a great day until next time. Well, that does it for the day. What resources have helped you? What books or videos have helped you be a more effective witness? Until next time, have a great day.